Welcome back to Guess What Day It Is. You don't know what you're talking about. So welcome back to the channel. This is going to be a little bit of a different video. We're going to talk about things that kind of pertain to fixing things and a lot of the things that we look at. One thing that struck me over the last 20 or so videos as we've gone through a lot of these stereos, how much they cost back when they were new. Some of these, adjusted for inflation, range from $1,500 in our dollars today up to $6,000 for some of these stereos. So there's a lot that has gone on and that is current in the news that really pertains to what we do. And at the end of the video, you'll see how this kind of wraps up into repair, which I'm very passionate about, as you know, and just generally fixing things as we kind of move forward with our economy. So I'm not an economist. I am a student of the economy. I run a small business. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I've done a lot of research on just kind of teaching myself about the basics of economics and how everything affects everything else. So we'll kind of dive into some of that stuff, but we're going to hit basically 4 main topics today. We're going to talk about globalization and how that kind of came about, just a brief overview. We're going to talk about inflation, what it is and what it isn't. There's a lot of misinformation out there about inflation. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of globalization, what benefits there are, and how it's affected us from a negative standpoint as well. And then we're going to kind of look at inflation by the numbers and how globalization has brought the prices down of things, but also to put in perspective how things cost, let's say, 50 years ago. We're going to go back to 1975, look at some numbers. We're going to look at different products and see how that worked. And then we're going to wrap all this up in a nice little bow. I'm very optimistic about what the future brings. I'm kind of an optimist by nature, so that's just the way I kind of think about things. So yeah, we'll get into it. So let's start off with talking about globalization. So kind of bringing this back to the 20th century and things that happened within, let's say, the Western world and how it affects us and kind of a lot of the world as well. So when we think of the modern era, we're talking about World War II, post-World War II and on. So after the war, much of the industrialized nations were destroyed. Europe was decimated. We talk about, Great Britain, who really was one of the pioneers of the Industrial Revolution. Their means of manufacturing was basically destroyed. If we look at the powerhouses of Germany and the changes that would go on within that nation, really, the place that was left was the United States. So the United States became an industrial powerhouse. We made all kinds of stuff, and we benefited from that from a financial standpoint. There was a lot of economic growth within the United States. You could make a good living if you were in one of the manufacturing industries, everything from the producers of steel all the way up to the folks that put the cars together. So we're talking about every aspect of manufacturing. And one of the benefits of the United States is we are rich in natural resources so that we could do a lot of that manufacturing. So if we look at the beginning of globalization, and once again, I'm just glossing over this quickly for the sake of time. Japan kind of entered the scene in the, let's say, the late 1960s into the 1970s. That pertains to a lot of the equipment that we see here. Just about every piece of equipment that we've had on the channel so far has been made in Japan. And if we look at from the automotive standpoint, Japan entered into the automotive market in the 1970s as well. Japan brought a great deal of quality and a great deal of innovation to the world market. If we look at the work ethic and everything that made Japanese goods as good as they are, that was a benefit and really kind of challenged the United States when it came to their manufacturing as well. We're going to talk a little bit about guitars. One aspect of a lot of the benefits of Japanese manufacturing was felt in the music areas as well. So they really brought a high quality, but not much of a price savings when it came to labor. Let's say it's possible that some of these products were, and I'm just shooting from the hip, 10% less than goods made in the United States. So it really didn't change how much we spent on things, but it certainly changed the potential for quality. It challenged the United States and their manufacturing to really step up the game. I would say in the car end, we really didn't catch up until maybe the 90s when it came to a lot of the quality products that were coming out. So very revolutionary in what they brought to the game, and the technology that they brought was also revolutionary too, especially if we look at televisions and the Sony Trinitron system. And so if we kind of move on from that era, another milestone would be when Korea entered the market. Now, Korea, we think of brands as such as LG and Samsung, Kia, Hyundai. A lot of those manufacturers started coming online in the late 80s and into the early 2000s, or into the early 90s. So they brought with them a lower wage. So it was easy to bring a factory to Korea and to have goods manufactured cheaper. And once again, this is shooting from the hip. We're probably talking about 30 to 40% cheaper than the US market. This really affected my dad and his business, which we've talked about in this video, which I'll put a link to up here, I think. I don't know where to point, but that's okay. You know what I'm talking about. So my dad, if you haven't watched that video, ran a TV repair business, and he basically bought the business from the owner of the shop called Perry TV in the early 90s, let's say 92, 93. At that point, the owner of the business decided to go to mobile only. The way the business was set up, originally we had a mobile technician, which was the shop owner, and then my dad was the bench technician. So if you brought your TV in to the shop, my dad would work on them. Or if there was something that couldn't be fixed in the field, it would come into my dad. So he was kind of behind the scenes a lot. Keep in mind, back in the 70s, TVs were giant pieces of furniture. So it wasn't something that you were going to toss in the back of your vehicle and take it up. So a field technician was very, very important. So in the early 90s, the owner of the business decided to kind of abandon the shop aspect of everything. So my dad and my mom decided to basically buy the inventory and everything that was in the shop, and to carry on with the repairs from that day forward. So another thing that happened along this time frame is the shop was a Zenith dealer, and Zenith ceased being a TV manufacturer within that time frame as well. So that might be something we do another video on. There are some snippets of that in the video that I linked to before as well. But what happened was the influx of TVs that were made with cheaper labor brought the price of TVs down to the point where the business that was Perry TV couldn't survive with the overhead of the shop. So my dad basically took that over and ran it until about 1999 with varying degrees of success with just him, and there wasn't much overhead. So I wouldn't say it was very successful, but there came a point in the late 90s where my dad, basically they sent the lease back, and my dad saw it as an opportunity to not renew the lease. So the Korean-built televisions were already starting to affect the market. Korean cars were starting to come in, not quite at that point, but into the mid-90s, we see Kia and Hyundai really start to kind of show up. Now, the Korean-built items were not near the quality that you would have seen out of the Japanese products. So there was more of a cost savings than there was a jump in quality or anything like that. The early Korean cars, Kia and Hyundai especially, needed quite a long time to rebuild their brand as something that was a dependable vehicle. So, and from there, we kind of fast forward into the early 2000s. So something that happened within that time frame, and something I really recommend that you go out and watch is there's a video. Uncommon Knowledge is something from it's basically a video series from Stanford University. There was a gentleman, I'm going to mispronounce his name, so I very much apologize. Frank Decatur, I think is how you pronounce it. I highly recommend that you look for that video. It came out probably late April of 2025, depending on when you're viewing this. But it really gives a little bit of a background into China and how it became the manufacturing superpower it is now. So in the early 2000s, China came on the scene, and really from the probably from I think the Nixon administration onward, China started to dip its toe into what we think of as a kind of a pseudo-communist but free market type setup, which really never really becomes a free market as we go forward as well. But without getting into the history of that, 2001 is really when China kind of took off. The Bush administration kind of allowed those Chinese products to enter into our economy here in the United States. And going forward from there, it really has brought the prices down significantly. So where Korea brought the prices down, let's say 30-40%, China brought in products that may have cost 90% less to produce than those counterparts made in the United States and elsewhere in the world as well. So then that kind of brings us into the modern age. Now, around the time that the pandemic happened, and actually before then, there's been a little bit of a breakdown of the ability of China to produce goods at such a low price. So there's something called once again, I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly. I think it's called the Cantillon effect. And what it is, it's when it's a theory based on when an economy grows, its manufacturing base becomes more wealthy, and the cost of goods go up because just the cost of labor goes up over time. So when the cost of labor goes up, the benefit of China tends to wear off. So over the last 10 years or so, a lot of goods have moved into Indonesia. They've also moved into India and Vietnam and a lot of other countries too. So there's always this bouncing from one area to another when it comes to globalization. And we also learned a lot about supply chain when it came to the pandemic and everything that we experienced as well. So there's also national security things that have to be worried about as we kind of get into globalization. But so that kind of gets you up to date with kind of a brief history of globalization. So let's talk about inflation. What is it? What creates it? All that kind of stuff. So inflation is basically the loss of purchasing power of a currency. I think all of us know of examples of, thinking of how much something cost back in the day. I remember when Jack in the Box tacos were 79 cents. I remember when gas was 79 cents a gallon. The older you get like me, the more of these things come up. But I think, especially over the last couple of years, we really have felt the effects of inflation. And inflation, for the most part, doesn't really go down. There are possibilities that could happen. That's called deflation. Deflation is something that is pretty bad from an economic standpoint, mainly because when you have a deflationary mindset, you could buy something today, but if you wait, the price is going to be lower, which causes the economy to get slower because everyone does the same thing. They just wait for prices to go down, which makes prices go down even faster, and it turns into a big spiral. So that's something that the Federal Reserve tries to prevent. I know it sounds great that it'd be, prices would come down, but generally that doesn't happen. So we also have something called disinflation, which means that inflation doesn't rise as fast as it does normally. So just to clarify a couple of those terms, but deflationary or inflation is just the loss of purchasing power over time. Milton Friedman talked about it being a monetary phenomenon. And what he meant by that is anytime more currency is introduced into an economy or into a market, it causes inflation. So that is, it's very true, and that's something that we saw during the pandemic as well. So what introduces more money into an economy? Despite what the crypto bros say, it's not some printer going burr up at the Federal Reserve. Money is lent into existence. So anytime that we borrow money, or the federal government borrows money, that introduces more currency into the market. So anytime I swipe my credit card, anytime we purchase a vehicle, anytime we purchase a house, that introduces more money into the system. So that is the first thing to kind of think about. So when we think of inflation, it generally follows economic growth. So if we have times where we have strong economic growth, if our economy grows by 5%, it's not uncommon to see inflation to be in that 5% range as well. Over the last, I think 20 years, economic growth has been about 2% per year. I think our GDP has grown at that level, and inflation, for the most part, has stayed at 2%. So if we look at inflation, that is probably one of the biggest drivers of inflation in general, is just economic growth. As more people enter into the market, there's more commerce, there's more businesses that borrow money to grow their factories, and so on and so forth. So inflation isn't necessarily a bad thing unless our pay and our salaries don't keep up with inflation. That's really where it becomes an issue. So when inflation spikes up quickly and our wages don't keep up with it, that's when we really start to feel that pain. And I think all of us that have been in this economy for the last 5 years have experienced that. So we look at supply and demand also affects what prices that we pay for things. So when there is less demand for something, prices come down. If there is more demand for something, people can charge more money for that, which makes prices rise. During the pandemic, we had an extreme supply shock and a lot of money coming into the system, both at the same time. So during the pandemic, we told everybody to stop manufacturing and stay home. That's what we did. And that wasn't just here, that was globally. So not only are the things that we produced put on hold, but all across the world that happened as well. So to offset that, our politicians decided to send out stimulus checks. This was both parties. So what happened was people got money that they could spend on things. And there was a lot of, people who felt kind of bad about stuff. And me personally, I like to spend money if I feel bad. So that's something that really ramped up. So you have low demand or low supply, extremely high demand. And I'm talking low supply as in nobody was making nothing, and high demand where people had money that they didn't have before. There were also things that happened, moratoriums on rent, student loans, all that allowed people to have more money in their pocket that they could use to spend on things. So that supply imbalance made the prices of things go up. So it wasn't so much driven by GDP, although I think if you look at GDP, there was GDP growth during that time frame because so many people were buying things. So the inflation that we saw during that time period was very much driven by low supply and high demand. So, that's just something that it doesn't happen very often. And I hope it never happens again. I think probably all of us think the same too. So inflation is very sector specific. There can be deflation in some areas and inflation in other areas. We've seen housing prices go down, which is technically deflation. We've seen a lot of different sectors that never really go down. And I think for the most part, when prices hit a certain point, very rarely do they go down. But some things can be affected by the ability to fund certain things. So if we look at, let's say, post-secondary education, there are a lot of things that have allowed colleges and universities to charge more money because there's more funds available through the student loan program. Back when I got a student loan, it was through my local bank. It was through Boatman's Bank in St. Louis. There were very tight restrictions on how much I could use. I had I barely had enough to even have for tuition and my books. During the Obama administration, student loans were brought into the federal government and backed by the federal government. So lending was much more free. Colleges could charge more money because they didn't have to worry about students only having a certain amount. They would get enough money lent to them so that they could charge whatever they wanted. And that, as I think everyone can see, has driven the price of colleges and universities just going to the point where it's unaffordable. So lots of different things can kind of affect different sectors as well. So we think of all of that to consider certain things. So what I've done is I've picked a couple things that we're going to kind of talk about and kind of compare them over time so that we can kind of see how inflation has affected that, and then maybe kind of think of things as we go forward as well. So let's look at some of the data behind inflation. This is a Fender Strategy. This is something that is pretty much unchanged for the last 70 years. All the materials that go in here, even the types of woods, we have maple, we have the same type of body construction, copper wound pickups, we have steel bridges. Everything in here is pretty much exactly the same as it was in 1954. So, how much did a fender Strat cost in 1954? It was $249, which seems pretty low right now. This is the closest thing to a standard Strat that Fender makes now. This is the American Professional Tool 2. It is $17.95 retail. So, big difference in price, right? The one thing that we have to take into consideration, how many weeks of the average salary would it take to buy a Fender Strat in 1954 or a Fender Strat in 2025? Well, back in 1954, it took about 4.5 weeks of salary to afford a Strat. In 2025, it takes about 2.1 weeks to be able to afford a new Stratocaster. So even though there's a significant difference in overall price between what this guitar started off as when it was first introduced 70 years ago to now, the amount of purchasing power it takes to buy the guitar is less. So why is it less? I'm pretty sure everything here is made in the United States, but there's a lot of technology that has made the construction of this a lot easier. CNC machining, just the streamline of production, and making things for 70 years, you get pretty darn good at it. So let's take a look at some other numbers of some other key items that we can kind of compare to back to 1975, compared to how much it took from a weekly standpoint to 2024, which is the closest I have any data for annual salaries. So let's take a look and see what we can figure out. Let's go a little more in depth with some of the data. Pretty much all this data was gathered from a few different sources. One was the Fred database through the St. Louis Federal Reserve, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and two different archives for different ads and all that kind of stuff. One would be ChristmasMuseTechnical.com, which is great. It's got a bunch of Sears catalogs and I highly recommend going and checking it out. It's a great trip down memory lane. And then the other one is Black Friday Archive. So it's really kind of hard to find some of the data for these individual things. But so looking at the first chart, we've got, this is all broken down in weeks of salary. So we've got everything starting with refrigerators in the dark blue line. We've got TVs on the orange line. Now, the one thing about TVs, as different technologies came about, pricing changed pretty significantly, going from CRT to projection TVs to plasma, and then to OLED and so on and so forth. So every time that new technology came out, it was pretty expensive, but it got cheaper quite quickly. The next one, we're looking at video game consoles. So that changed. So the first, obviously, video game consoles have not been consistent for the last 50 years. So in 75, we went with Pong. 1980, the Atari 2600. We went with the NES in 1985, Sega Genesis in 1990, and then pretty much using the PlayStation 1 through 5 going on from there. And then going through different computers was also kind of a challenge. So I wanted this to be kind of a thought. Steve at Gamer Nexus put out a video talking about cheap computing is over. Really great video because he did a lot of legwork talking to different manufacturers about the effects of the tariffs. So if you haven't watched that, I highly recommend you watch that. But this is kind of a rebuttal to that. Cheap gaming is only a recent phenomenon. If you were doing anything with computers back in the 90s or before, you're going to spend a significant amount of money on that. So if we look at the pink line, you can see how that really kind of ramped up. And then around the 2005 mark, everything kind of got a lot cheaper going from there too. So I just wanted to use this as an illustration that people paid a lot more of their salaries towards something 50 years ago, 40 years ago, even 30 years ago. So globalization has brought something very useful and helpful, but it is not the historic norm. So just kind of putting it out there that this may be just a short time in history that we can benefit from. And we'll talk about the pros and cons when we wrap this up too. So, and then the next chart I want to kind of bring up is housing. Now this video is not specifically on housing. That is definitely a very hot button item. The price of housing is the most unaffordable it has ever been in the history of, at least in this data series going back to 1975. We got pretty close, 2005-ish, 2007, 2008 at the peak of the housing bubble, but we have exceeded that as well. So when we think about how much of our weekly salaries go towards things, housing soaks up a lot of that. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up. It's my belief that housing prices will come down just purely for the fact that they're not affordable. So the cure for high prices sometimes are high prices. If I were a betting man, I would say probably in the next 5 years, housing prices are going to be back to a historical trend line of increasing about 2 to 4% each year. So that's my hope. But so I just wanted to kind of put that into context too. This isn't a video on housing. This is a video more on durable goods and all that as well. And if we are spending more on durable goods, we're going to have less money for housing, which doesn't sound like a good thing. But once again, that can help bring those prices down, which is good for everyone, especially for those who are just getting started, graduating from school and trying to get a place of their own with the goal to hopefully be a homeowner at some point. So I know that seems just unobtainable, which really breaks my heart for a lot of people. So what's some pros and cons of globalization? The first one that just pops right off the top of my head is lower cost goods. Just as we talked about Fender Strat, Stratocasters are made all from Fender as a corporation, are made all over the world. So they're made here in the United States, they're made in Mexico, they're made in Japan. The Squire line is made in China and Indonesia. Fender Player, or the new Fender Standard series is made, I believe, in Indonesia. So what that does, it gives you a wide range of options. If you want, you can buy a US-made Strat, or you can, if you're just getting into playing guitar, you can buy a Squire for $250. That is a good starting point. So that's a benefit. So thinking about raising countries out of poverty, if you think about countries like Korea and Indonesia, as the standard of living increases because of the industrialization, tons of people are pulled out of poverty. And when I say poverty, I don't think we can really conceive of the type of poverty that these men and women live in. We are very blessed in this country to have what we have. So when I talk about pulling people out of poverty, it is a significant thing, and is our, something to wish good for our fellow humanity. That is definitely a pro. Not all countries are good at that, China being one of them, but it has helped people in China for sure. So there's a more diverse amount of goods that we can get as well. So if you think about different countries having their strengths, Japanese goods, they were on the cutting edge of technology in the 70s and 80s, and we benefited from that greatly. All the way up until the 90s, we talk about the advent of the CD and tapes and everything from all the things from a musical standpoint and media standpoint that we benefited from the geniuses that are around this world. So it gives us a bigger pool of an inventive mind that really is a benefit to all of us. And I think it has really helped our technology increase over these last 50 years as we go forward. There are higher profits to be had as well. So if you're a company, you can maximize your profits and be able to get more sales because you can manufacture something at a lower price point, or have more profit margin as well. If you think about NVIDIA and their latest AI chips, I think their profit margin is probably in the 60 or 70% range, which is great for NVIDIA. But I bet you there's going to be somebody that's going to come along and knock them off that profit high. So, but that is a benefit, is to increase profits by lowering the amount that it costs to produce something. There are benefits from a logistical standpoint. So a lot of countries don't have the same type of regulations when it comes to building factories. And a lot of countries have done a good job of putting infrastructure together to help manufacturing. And China is one that has done an excellent job with that. So there's a lot of cons as well. So when we think of people being lifted out of poverty, there is a counterbalance to that where you have people that lose their jobs. So we look at manufacturing in this country. It has decreased significantly over the last 50 years and has accelerated since the year 2000. So we have the industry itself that manufactures the actual good. There's support, that's the supplies that are needed, the different vendors that bring all the things to that manufacturer. There's the companies that deliver the logistics, the truckers that bring those items, the trains that haul the items, the planes that take those items from one end of the country to the next. There's also aftermarket. So if we think about after that product is built and sold, there are aftermarket companies that come along to make replacement parts as well. And then there's the support folks. And that's really where I think I come in, because of my technical skills and just how I'm built. And that's also kind of one of the things that is kind of affected my family directly, is the loss of the people that repair the item. As the cost of goods come down, the threshold between the repair of that good and replacement gets smaller and smaller. So we get to a point where if it costs $200 to repair that item, a new one is $350, and it's got some cool features that your old one didn't have, just toss it and get something else. So the people that support the products are gone. If you think, when was the last time you've seen a cobbler? You may not have even heard of a cobbler. A cobbler is someone who fixes shoes. My wife and I were talking about having a tailor or a seamstress. If you buy a pair of jeans that you love, but they don't have the length, you got to cut them off or do something. Or if you have the skills to sew it up yourself, having a sewing machine, that's great. But having a tailor or seamstress is just not something that is as common as it was. I remember watching the Andy Griffith show, and there was a guy that fixed stuff. You take your toaster to this guy, and he fixed it for you. I mean, what a novel concept. That's not something that that I ever saw in my lifetime. So that, once again, that's other jobs in the chain that go away because of globalization. So there's a balancing act between people getting pulled out of poverty and also, on the other side, people losing their jobs on that as well. So there are the potential of quality issues. We can benefit from the quality of different countries based on their work ethic and their intensity on making everything as good as possible. Germany and Japan are two examples of that. You guys know I love my Knipex pliers. They are fantastic. They're German made. They're very expensive, but we benefit from their engineering and the quality of steel. The Japanese brought so much innovation throughout the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s that we benefit from today. So on the flip side of that, there's the possibility of getting stuff that is subpar when it comes to quality. One thing that we have seen over the last 20 years is the durability of the things that we buy, especially appliances, especially cars, all that kind of stuff. So if we look at we were talking about a 20 cubic foot refrigerator that you would buy in 1975. I would almost guarantee that refrigerator would still be running today, where if you buy a refrigerator 5 years ago, it's a 50-50 chance that refrigerator is going to be working or not. A lot of times that refrigerator is either made overseas or outside this country, made from parts that are made on the outside. A lot of that has to do with planned obsolescence, which is another thing that we'll kind of get to in a second. But the overall cheapening of things has been a very large side effect of that. So, speaking of planned obsolescence, it has opened the door for planned obsolescence. Talk about Louis Rossmann and the right to repair. Manufacturers make it very difficult to repair things now on purpose. They want you to buy a new product instead of reusing the old product. But things are cheap enough where they can get away with that. So if it costs a significant amount more to replace your dishwasher, then there's a good chance that planned obsolescence would make you go through the process of buying this, it falling apart, and you never buy that again. So the market gives incentive for people to choose the product that is worth the most for the money. So the problem with the way the cost difference between repair has developed, it has given license to many manufacturers to go forward with a lot of the planned obsolescence. I firmly believe that if that wasn't the case, we wouldn't be in the situation we are now. So that's some of the pros and cons. So lot to think about, lot to consider. There's no right or wrong with any of this, but it's good to kind of know what we've benefited from and what we've lost over the last 20 years. So I am an optimist. It's just my nature. I'm always looking for the good side of things. So no matter how you feel about globalization, chances are we are nearing a point where globalization will be less, will be much different, maybe it will be more regional. A lot more things will be pulled onshore. So there's going to be some changes that go forward. So no matter what happens, even with the current political climate, and that includes tariffs or anything like that, eventually we get to a point where there's no more cheap labor. and that's called, that's part of the Cantillon effect. Basically, it's a theory in economics that is kind of a trickle down kind of a setup where when a nation starts manufacturing, the rich and powerful benefit first, and eventually it gets down to those who are lesser. In that it focuses more on the gap between those that get in early and those that get in late. But the eventual outcome is that everybody is raised. And with that means that the price of labor goes up because the standard of living goes up. So as we've seen, as we moved from Korea, well, basically from Japan to Korea to China to Indonesia to India, that effect kind of has been taking place, especially in China over the last couple of years. I think wages went from an average of, you have to forgive me, monthly, from about $100-ish a month to like $1,200 a month in the span of about 10 years. So that's a significant increase. If you look at, prices of transporting those things, that also tends to go up as well. So eventually we're going to come to the end of globalization no matter what. So there's only so many countries that are able to produce cheap labor. Hopefully what happens over time is each one of those countries becomes better as they go. So my hope is that Korea, as we go through China, I hope especially for China, as we go into all these different nations, that their standard of living has gotten to a point where it can sustain itself. It hopefully doesn't go back to where it was before. So, but the price of goods will probably go up a little bit. And I'm okay with that. And really, we all should be okay with that as well. In the recent history, we're talking within the last half century, as you saw in the data, people were paying a significant amount more of their salary towards some of these items, whether that's a TV, a fender strap, a refrigerator, a vehicle. All of that stuff required more of their weekly salary. A lot of those products were something that people were willing to pay for. Now, they didn't get one every year. You didn't buy a new TV every other year. You didn't buy the latest, stereo every year. But what you bought something that was quality, and you had it fixed, which opens the door once again to a lot of different industries. I have a feeling that as the prices of things continue to go up because of the lessening of globalization, there's going to be opportunities for people like you and me who aren't good at sitting behind a desk, who aren't good at doing corporate things. So it's going to give us a lot of opportunity for an entire generation that really has no purpose. If we look at the amount of people in Gen Z that are just kind of out there, there's no opportunities for them. Because there's nothing, if you're like me, who's dyslexic and doesn't do good in school, what are you going to do? If you can get into a technical realm, if you can get into something like repair or problem solving when it comes to engineering replacement parts for something to make it a better thing once it's repaired, that opens a whole new door for people to have jobs, to provide for their family, and to live a fulfilled life. And that's really a job is a job. There's a difference between a job and a career, in my personal opinion. A job is something you go to, you punch a clock, you do your thing, you go home. There's no joy, there's no thought of, I created something today. You're just doing something to collect a paycheck at the end of the week. If there is something that you can manufacture and be a part of that manufacturing, whether that's an automobile or whatever that is, you can say, I put X on that. I did it to the best of my ability, and now that customer has something that they can enjoy for years to come. So even though there's a lot of negative things that could come with all this, I think this is going to start a revolution when it comes to opportunities for people to get into new fields. So another benefit is also e-waste and all that too. So if we can do all this and instead of looking at this as a loss of something, we can see this as something that's got the potential to do a lot of good. So it's just some thoughts. So I know, once again, this was a much different video than you're used to. Don't worry, we're going to get back to tearing stuff apart and trying to fix stuff and all that. So, but all this is really relevant to the things that we talk about on a daily basis. Taking things and fixing them, because there might be a point in the future where that can turn into a career. So once again, I really appreciate you viewing and watching. Hopefully you didn't turn off, hopefully you're still with me. But I really appreciate every single one of you. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Guess What Day It Is.